Right, here we go. So as you're all aware, this month we are covering the theme of movement, and a little bit like the last two presentations, as well as incorporating movement in photography into the theme, I will begin a little bit by going into some of the well-being aspects of movement as well. Because as we kind of know, I'm trying to bring a lot of things within this to try and benefit people as much as possible in every way kind of imaginable, with these challenges every month. So it's to get people thinking a little bit more about, I guess, what movement means, as well as how we can incorporate it into our photography for this month. So what I'll be going into tonight is I'll do a very brief section on what is movement. So you're all aware of what movement is, of course, but it's nice to go back to basics and really think about what the word actually means. And then we'll do a little bit, just like I said, on the benefits of movement for well-being, which I'm sure many of you, again, are aware of. But I've kind of realized a lot recently that there's a lot more we get when we benefit from getting out with our cameras than we maybe realize, and particularly from a movement aspect. We've spoken a little bit the last few months about the kind of mental health and emotional well-being results that we get when we're out with our camera. I think it's quite nice to think a little bit about the kind of physical benefits that we get as well. So I'm just going to tie that in a little bit at the beginning before we get fully into the photography. And then we'll speak about how we can incorporate movements, of course, into our photography. I will begin by the kind of obvious things of freezing movement in photographs, but then we'll delve into all the different techniques that we can use to show movement in our images, which many of you have already been trying. But there might be one or two things that I share this evening that I don't believe anybody's tried yet, which might just give you some more ideas for this month's challenge. And then there's a few little things I've put at the end just to make us kind of wrap things up and think about the whole idea of movement and how we can incorporate it more into our imagery. And then, as I say, we'll have a nice little discussion and sort of question and answer session at the end. So movement, the very basic definition of movement is the change of place or position or posture. And if we think about it, pretty much everything in life moves, apart from some inanimate objects. But when we really delve into it, I think when this challenge was set, there was some very obvious things that came up. People were doing wildlife photography and sports photography and trying out movement with the camera. But when we really start to delve into it, we realize, like I say, that pretty much everything moves. The sea moves, the river moves, all water moves in some form or dynamic. We've looked a little bit with clouds on the Facebook group. So of course, some days you barely see the clouds moving. Other days they can move pretty fast. The trees will move in the breeze. You've of course got bugs and insects moving from one place to the other to pollinate and aid decomposition. The earth, of course, moves around the sun. Time flies and continues to move. And of course, we've got the transport element of the cars, trains, planes, and bikes as they move from A to B. But if you think about it from us as a human perspective, you know, we must move to maintain our circulation, healthy joints, physical strength, and overall well-being. So when we actually really delve into the theme of movement, pretty much everything in life moves from one degree or another. And even if you're photographing an inanimate object that you don't feel does move, you can, of course, move yourself to create some interesting images and different techniques to make that inanimate object come to life. So pretty much this challenge, as we're kind of realizing, hopefully with every challenge, is like the scope is so broad, and hopefully movement is beginning to come more and more alive for you all as you get out there and connect with all the different subjects. So we're going to look a bit now, as I say, into movement for well-being, and more specifically about how getting outdoors with your camera can aid this, because that's of course what we're all trying to do with these challenges. So there's just a little bit of a fact here, just to put things into perspective in some shape or form. So basically, 200 years ago, 90% of the world lived in agricultural communities, and people sat for only 3 to 5 hours a day, to take breaks from working. But now most Americans, where this statistic came from, sits for 13 to 15 hours a day. And of course, as photographers, we are used to sitting quite a lot, editing images, looking through our cards and everything we've taken. But actually, the if we look at kind of everybody's life broadly, it's kind of like trying to get that balance nowadays, isn't it? Of spending time out in nature and of course the after effects of doing things on the computer. But I think it's quite an interesting fact there, because I think a lot of us probably realise that we maybe don't move as much in life as we maybe feel we should. And it's just quite interesting to see that in such a short space of time, how much sort of the human population, particularly in the Western world, how we have slowed down from that perspective. So for many of us, we use photography as a release, as a reason to get outdoors, a way of exploring new places, a reminder to get into nature, a way of connecting us to nature. The reason many of us organise holidays or trips away, and I know some of you, of course, have got camper vans and things, and going away and doing photography is part of your reason for having that. Some people use it as a way of coping with life, and some people use it as a way of connecting with their creativity. And all of these things, of course, require movement to get out there and to embrace the art of photography. But have you ever thought about the positive benefits this movement has on you, maybe physically or mentally? Because if we think about it, I think we've discussed a little bit the last few months, as I said, about how much it can affect them positively, people who maybe experience anxiety or depression, or just getting that release. We've all spoken about that. But when we break it down to the more kind of physical and mental aspects, it can be quite interesting, actually, when we piece it all together and realise that photography isn't just taking photographs. It also has so many other benefits from us, which I know many of you are aware of. So of course, the most common way we move when we're out with our cameras is through walking. And walking in many cases is probably the most underrated forms of exercise. You know, we all hear about we should get X amount of exercise a week, but actually walking is probably one of the healthiest and easiest ways that we can get exercise. And if we look at actually a lot of the healthiest people who live quite a long time, a lot of them walk a lot. And in fact, I had a 91-year-old client last year who came over from Canada to do 2 days. Well, she was here in Scotland for a number of weeks doing various photography workshops, but she booked 2 days with me on the Moray coast. And I asked her what her secret was to traveling around the world by herself at 81 years old. And she said, just don't stop moving. She said, the moment you stop moving is the moment you start deteriorating. And you could see for her that photography mixed with travel was what was keeping her really fit and healthy. And I just found that a really interesting thing. And I don't think I'll ever forget her answer to that question. So of course, we all know that the physical benefits of walking, with the increased heart rate and improved circulation and increase of breathing. And of course, when we look at what it does to things like our muscle tone and strengthening our bones, it also strengthens our immune system and helps with digestion, as well as many more things. And of course, when we are moving around as well, you know, it's getting just everything in our body moving, as well as the physical act of us moving. And this is something, like I say, that we all do when we're out with our camera to some degree or another, whether we are walking far or whether we're just getting out of a car and moving a little bit to a set location. And for those in the group who have mobility issues, I know there's some people who can't walk very far, but even just getting out and walking a little bit, I think you all kind of feel those benefits, but we're not always aware of them because we're always so focused on the imagery and the lights and what we're doing. But it's actually quite nice to think about how many people speak about how they feel good when they're out with their camera. And we often forget actually what it's doing for us physically, which I think is quite an interesting thing to bring up. And again, we've spoken about this already before, but of course, the mental health benefits of walking, you know, it's been shown that it releases those feel-good hormones, which will improve your mood, reduce stress, manage anxiety, can help you sleep better, and increases your energy levels. You know, if you're sitting around all day on a computer, you get lethargic and tired. When you're out and about with your camera, doing things and moving from one place to another, you do feel more energized. And there's a number of reasons for that, but part of that is the movement, of course. And getting out with your camera and walking around, many of you know, can help with difficult times. It can also improve your confidence and self-esteem, and it can also reduce your risk of depression as well. So we can see, tying all of this together, like I say, with photography, that it's interesting to delve into this subject of moving and also to relate that to to how us physically moving can benefit us when doing our imagery. And an added bonus that I'm sure many of you will like is moving, and particularly walking, has been shown to make us more creative. And one study I found in particular found that people were more creative thinkers while walking, particularly when walking outdoors. And researchers concluded that walking opens up free flow of ideas. And again, I'm sure you've all experienced this when you're out walking, and if you're out walking with your camera sometimes as well, things just suddenly start coming to you, or new ideas start coming to you, or solutions to your problems can sometimes arise, and it can just be really nice. So if you're having a creative slump at any point during your time with the Photographic Connections community, potentially going for a walk added with your camera may help you just to get out of that creative rut. Because of course, when you're out and about, particularly in nature, you're constantly seeing new things, bumping into different people, and you just naturally feel like you want to be more creative. And sometimes just going out there without any idea what you're going to photograph can spark something. And I just thought it was interesting, this study showing that walking has been shown to make us more creative as well. And other forms of movement that you might want to consider when doing photography is to flow with your subject. And what I mean by this is if you're, let's say, at a beach and you've got the grasses moving in the wind, sometimes if you think about how they're moving and you move with them, it can connect you a little bit more with the subject and help you to decide how you then want to go and photograph it. And for those of you who maybe potentially go and swim in the sea and do wild swimming and stuff, again, sometimes if you just flow with the sea, you get a really good connection with actually how the water moves around, and it can help you to identify easier how to then photograph it. And I mean, we all need to have quite a lot of confidence to do this, but when you're out and about, sometimes just dancing, however you feel like moving, and kind of move where and how your body wishes. I know this probably sounds a bit kind of out there to some people, but I think when we are out there in nature, when we can connect with it through movement, it can just help us to connect with our subject more, and also increase all these positive things that we've already looked at a little bit this evening. So something to consider is how do you move when you create your images? So are you one of these photographers who goes out and you just kind of put your tripod up and you stand in one spot and you're always static and still? Because we see that a lot, particularly in landscape photography. We'll see photographers go to a location, they'll set up their tripods and they'll just sit there and wait for the light. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes actually, if we're moving around more and connecting more and taking different images, we can, not only is that in giving us more options and opportunities, but we're experiencing more of this positive feelings. So can you add more movement to make your images more creative as well? And we'll look at that a little bit more as we progress throughout this presentation. But it's just something to think about next time you're out with your camera. Are you one of these people that just stands still and watches and waits, which is fine because you're still engaging, of course, and you're getting that well-being mindfulness element? Or are you somebody who's frantically moving around maybe, and you're not fully benefiting from things because you're a little bit too maybe excitable and all over the place? Or do you kind of mix the two together so that you can get that kind of even balance when you're out and about? So we'll now delve into the section that I'm sure most of you have been most looking forward to, and that is how we use movement, particularly in photography, and the joys of using movement in our images. And it's actually been quite interesting looking at this because you guys have come up with so many incredible things already, and so many different techniques and genres and different places. And like I said in the beginning, it's actually incredible how many things come under the topic of movement. And of course, so capturing motion in an image can completely change the look and feel and enhance the story you're trying to tell, helping also to add to the mood and emotion. And this, of course, is something that we spoke about quite a bit in the first webinar when we were looking at colour. You know, the colour that you choose in your images can really help with the kind of emotions and the feel of your image. and help you to tell that story, particularly when things like mood and emotion are involved. But also when you combine that color element with motion, you just add an extra layer to your storytelling. And the same goes for black and white as well. You know, if there's a frozen subject or a moving subject, you can really create more emotion and mood. So all of these presentations are kind of overlapping with each other and are just giving us something additional to think about as well. So the first and most common way of photographing movement is, of course, freezing that movement. So the kind of freezing at the movement allows us to play with what can arguably be one of the most exciting things about photography, which of course is the ability to capture a split second in time and show details that are unable to be seen by the human eye. And we see this particularly, I think, when photographing things like crashing waves. You know, if we have a really fast shutter speed and we can see every tiny little droplet of water, you know, that's something that to our eye we struggle to see because it's such a fast thing. But actually being able to capture that split second in time, it's exciting. And as we see here, it's kind of why photography, I guess, was invented in the first place, was to make these memories, take these moments in time and document things. And of course, as technology is advancing more and more and more, we're getting so much more ability to freeze things in time. And this, of course, is something that many people have already been exploring. And this image here by Daryl is something that a few of you have looked into already yourself, is photographing wildlife and particularly flying birds. So of course, for these sort of images, you need a very fast shutter speed to freeze them in motion, but you're getting that split second of movement and everything that's kind of happening in this photograph, particularly with regards to the puffin's shape and how its wings are spread out here. You know, that's something that to the eye we would struggle to see. We'd see the motion and see it coming into land, but we wouldn't be able to see all the details within its wings and face and everything at the same time because it happens so quickly. So of course, wildlife is a great thing for us to try and use as part of this challenge. There's another image here by Simon, and again you can see here this split moment in time. You know, it's something that we, again, would struggle to see with the eye in many respects, and just being able to see this shape and how it's coming in to eat this fly here. It's just an incredible thing to be able to photograph and to really utilize as part of this challenge, freezing that moment in time as these interesting things are happening around us. And as I mentioned already about crashing waves, which we can see here in this image by Glenn. So there's so many ways to photograph waves, and we'll look at some of the other ways to show more motion later on in this presentation. But of course, crashing waves themselves and getting that spray and those tiny dots is a great way to again embrace with this movement challenge and capture that moment in time. And of course, for those of us in the UK, we're probably not going to get much winds throughout this month, but you never know, we may do. But of course, you're more than welcome to share older images as well if you have any really exciting crashing wave photographs that you'd like to share with the group. And this is a beautiful image here by Christopher, and this really shows how freezing water in a moment in time can create something really unique and different. So this is, you know, some water flowing here and just the shapes within it on this day and how Chris has photographed this. It really shows that you can get really nice abstract images with photographing that moving water in a split second. And this can be particularly exciting to do, say, if you're somewhere like a harbour, where there's a lot of reflections on the water, or like a canal or a river that's going through a town, and you know it's quite a still day, or a lake or a loch or something like that. You can get some really interesting, you know, really quick images of the water in motion with reflections as well, which can just create some beauty. And again, the water's moving so fast, particularly in reflection scenes where there's some motion in the water. Again, it's difficult to see that with the eye, but if you freeze that in motion, you can get some beautiful abstract imagery. And sports, of course, is something that's been very, very popular. And this image here by Hayata shows a lovely a kite surfer here, a windsurfer, a kite surfer, that's what it is, isn't it? Out at sea, and just being able to freeze it in motion. But of course, there's so many different ways of photographing things like this. And here we've got that beautiful backside light coming in behind the surfer here, allowing it to be him or her to be showcased as a silhouette. So it's nice to be able to bring these different things together and create images of real interest. Another sports image here by Sue just shows a completely different scene and weather conditions, but again, how freezing that moment. You know, here you can really see how wet and soggy the cyclists are, and you can see by some of their facial expressions, particularly the guy in the front, and the guy behind him as well, actually, they just look like they're just not quite enjoying it that much, and they're pretty exhausted and wet and probably cold, but they're pushing through it to get the race finished. And you can just see, you know, by freezing this in that split moment, you're getting in some ways that emotion here and that kind of dread and pushing through your limitations to get to where you want to be. So yeah, like I say, a lot of you have played around with the freezing in motion already, and it's a great way to be able to capture these moments. But if you want to delve into something a little bit more creative, we'll look now at some of the other ways that you can interpret this challenge this month. And one, of course, is motion blur. So in some cases, motion blur is associated with poor technique or inadequate lighting conditions. And we've all been there when we've tried to photograph something and it's come out blurred and we've not intended for it to do so. So we all know what it's like to create images like that. However, when we intentionally do motion blur and we do it in a very intentional way, we can create really striking images that represent sort of dynamic energy and represent a story that we're trying to tell as well. So for those of you who haven't done motion blur before, it's created by using slow shutter speeds, either by moving after you press the shutter and you move a little bit as you've just pressed it, or you're standing still with a slightly longer shutter speed and there's a subject moving through your frame. So we can see again a few examples here taken by you guys, and again a photograph here by Daryl. And for those of you who attended the community check-in last week, we actually spoke about this image quite a bit because Mel from Australia was wanting to photograph some falling rain as part of this month's challenge. And Daryl very kindly shared this on the Facebook group to show how he's photographed rain and allowed it to move within his image in the past so that we can actually see it. So I'm sure many of you that have photographed rain before, quite often you don't really see it, or it's really streaked, whereas Daryl's managed to do something nice here because of where the light's coming through the top of these buildings to illuminate the raindrops and create that motion. So here you can see Daryl has stood still, but we've got something moving through the image, and you've got that slight blurring of the raindrops here that allows them to stand out in the frame and give him quite a unique image. And here as well, you can see this image by Dave. You've got this movement here in the grasses. And again, he's stood still and taken this image, but the grasses are moving as he's doing so. And this is something that we can do a lot of, and particularly at this time of year, you know, both within the UK and America for you, Wandalin, there's going to be a number of fields and wildflower meadows, I imagine, out there all over the country in different places that, you know, before they get cut later in the summer, we're able to go out and photograph them. And equally at the coast as well, you've got, again, all the grasses and things moving. And it can be really nice to play around with this and just stand in one spot and allow them to move through your scene. And you can either have a little bit of movement like Dave's got here, or you can have a longer shutter speed and get them really kind of blurred through your scene and just sort of see what you prefer, really. And this incredible image here by Gary, which won an award or a competition, I believe, in the Edinburgh Festival. Again, you can see here, he's stood still, and this dancer in the middle has stood still, and all these other dancers are moving around them. So again, you can see here that by just having that slightly long shutter speed, you're getting that beautiful motion, which just allows to show that movement and how these dancers are moving throughout the scene. A really striking representation, this actually, and it's quite nice to play around with that static subject with something moving around it. And this image here by Trisha again showcases this, standing on a bridge. You've got all these beautiful static objects around her. She stood still and the train is coming towards her, or maybe away from her actually. I can't remember. Oh, it's away, isn't it? Because it's a steam train. So it's moving away from her and she's getting this nice blurring motion as it's doing so. So again, it's just adding something to the image. You know, photographing this without the motion would have still been a lovely image, lovely composed, lovely light. But having that motion, it's just adding some movement to the scene, which just gives it something a little bit different, or some people might argue something extra. This image here by Brian's a good representation of this as well. You've got him standing in one spot. You've got Barnes Nest Lighthouse here, nice and solid in the scene, and you've got this flock of birds flying through the top, and it just gives the scene some movement and showcases, I guess, their flight past the lighthouse. And it's just something to play around with, really. And particularly when you're photographing early in the morning or late at night, you sometimes can be quite difficult to get fast enough shutter speeds to freeze birds and, you know, make them really sharp. So actually doing something like this sometimes happens quite naturally, as I've experienced a few times in my photography. And this is one of my examples of this. This was taken at sunrise a few years ago, and here you can see all the seagulls on the bottom that are standing still, and the flock that are taking off above them. And it's just nice, I think, in some ways to have that slight blur here, because you can still make out that they are, you know, seagulls flying through the scene, but it just adds that motion. You can see they're taking off, they're flying, and it just tells a little bit more of a story in some cases. But obviously in some images, this can be a bit messy. It's about deciding for your own kind of creative expression whether you want this effect or whether you want the frozen effect that we looked at a minute ago. And this is another image that I took here of the grasses I was speaking about moving at the coast. And again, you can just see here that you can still make out that they are grasses, but you've got that slight blur here, which allows the viewer to understand that it was quite a windy day and it was blowing in the wind. Because if I'd taken this as a really fast shutter speed, it would still have been a nice image, but it wouldn't have been clear to the viewer that it was a windy day. Whereas here, like I say, you really get that feeling that the wind is blowing these around, and by doing this, it's really the only way of showcasing that in a single static image. And panning is the next creative way that we can allow for some movement in our photographs. So panning is where you follow the movement of a subject with your camera using a slower shutter speed than normal, so that you get a blurred background, but the subject itself remains pretty much sharp. It's very challenging to do this, actually. It does take quite a lot of practice. It's not something I've done much of, but to actually do it at the right speed that your subject is still pretty sharp it can take quite a while to master this technique, but it's definitely worth trying if you're interested in it. And if you are, panning works best and it's easiest to do with subjects that are following a straight path. So if you've got, let's say you're standing at the side of a road and you've got a car moving from left to right, that's going to work really well because it's moving across your scene. But if you were photographing something that was zigzagging across the frame, you're going to end up with a very messy image. So you're really looking for something that's on a straight path. So yeah, like I say, to do this, you need to choose a slower shutter speed than normal and follow the motion of the camera and kind of press your shutter as they're passing and continue to move them. So we've got an image here by Sue, and I think Sue's the only one, as far as I'm aware, that has tried panning so far. And you can see here that the background's really blurred And although her subject is also blurred, I think it's quite interesting, this actually, because she's kept the subject in colour and the background's nice and black and white. And you can still tell here that it's a motorbike and that you've got, people on it. So it's just quite nice here to show that motion through the scene and just create that movement. Like when you look at this photograph, it feels like the bike is moving really fast, which just gives that visual representation of what was happening in front of her. And these are just some images that I took off the internet, because it's not something that I've personally done much of at all. But here you can see, I believe this must be in New York, you can see all these cars moving through the scene, and you can see how by panning they've blurred all the lights on the buildings. And although some of the cars are blurred as well, you've got this one or two in the middle that are still pretty sharp, and you can see exactly what's going on here. And it really gives the feel of a really fast moving electric city. So if this person was to photograph this in a very fast shutter speed and frame, you would have had a nice image of the cars moving, well, the cars frozen in time moving across the road. And of course, the buildings would have been lovely and illuminated. But actually, to showcase the hustle and bustle of the city in one image, the only way you can do this really is by panning. And this really gives you that electric, frantic, busy feel. And you can also do it with things like wildlife, as you can see here with this tiger. So you've got this tiger here running or walking through the scene. But again, you can see by having this motion blur that it gives us the visual representation that the tiger's moving quite fast and possibly pursuing some prey. So you've got more of a story here, and you're really showcasing that movement in the image. And then we've, of course, got intentional camera movement, which a number of you have played around with so far, which has been brilliant to see. So for those of you who haven't, this is when there's not actually anything moving in your frame, but you move your camera to create an abstract image with a feeling of movement. So like I was saying earlier, this can be very good when you're photographing static subjects. So if you're out on a day when there's not any wind, or you're out on a day where you want to be quite creative with anything really, you can move your camera to allow all those inanimate static objects to move. So to do this, you use a slower shutter speed and you move your camera basically in any way you want. You can go horizontally, vertically, you can twist it around, just whatever you feel you want to do to create a pleasing abstract shot. And some people also will zoom in and out with their lens to get a different effect as well. But the exciting thing with intentional camera movement is that there are no rules at all. You can literally do whatever you want to do. But one thing that I was taught by Charlotte Bellamy when I did a workshop with her last year is if you move in the direction of a subject. So what I mean by that is she spoke about photographing a building, and she said if you move your camera in the same shape as the window frames, for instance, you're going to get a much more pleasing ICM image than if you're just kind of wiggling your camera about all over the place. So, you sometimes see these images of trees where people pan up and down to kind of elongate the trunks. And you see these images of the coastline where people pan from side to side along the horizon to really draw that around. So sometimes if you actually move in the shape of what you're photographing, it can really help with the feel of the image. But like I say, there's no rules, so you can try that and see how you get on, or you can just go crazy moving your camera around and see what sort of images you manage to create. And again, these are a few images that have been taken by you guys. We've got this image here by Alex, just a very slight motion here, but just enough to give the image more of a kind of windy feel, I guess. It looks like quite a choppy day here in the sea in this image, but by using a little bit of ICM here, it really adds to that as well, and shows this person going into the sea in what seems to be quite choppy conditions. And here, this image by Christopher, again, you can see how he's panned from side to side here, in line with the landscape, to really kind of pull the lines from side to side and create that blur. So this is what I was meaning by kind of drawing or moving your camera in the direction of what you're photographing. And this image here by Sue, which many of you were really enjoying the other night. Here, very subtle ICM going on here. You can still make out everything in the scene, including the two people swimming in the sea, but enough here to give it a beautiful artistic representation. And yeah, it just really brings out the kind of softness and the colour of the scene, and just gives it some more movement as well, which is really, really nice to see. So you can see even by those three images already, by working with the scene, how they all portray different movement, different emotions, different feelings, depending on the weather and the scene and how they've been photographed. And it's just an image here that I took a few years ago when I first started ICM in the woodland in the autumn of the ferns on the forest floor. And again, I just was kind of just wiggling my camera around here, but I just quite like the different shades of oranges and yellows throughout this scene. And I thought it was just quite a nice artistic impression, and it could almost be viewed in some ways as like an oil pastel painting or drawing or something. And that's one of the things I like about ICM, is often the images don't always look like photographs. They can often look like other medium has been used to create them, which means as a photographer we can really embody what we spoke about in the first webinar about photography being painting with light. You know, you really are painting with light when you're doing things like ICM. And this is just a really abstract image I took last year. This is actually of a beach with a kind of cliff area, or a little sort of, it's not really a cliff, but it's like a big rock that leads down the coastline. And this is literally just by me moving my camera in all different directions over, I think it was like a minute exposure, but I was moving it really fast and all over the place. And I've managed to just create these really abstract, surreal, out there images, which are very different to any of the ICM images I've ever created before. But I really like them, actually. I imagine these sort of things being on my wall because they're different, and they're just yeah, I quite like them. And this is a very subtle ICM image. So for those of you who don't like these really artistic, crazy ICM shots, but you want to create an image that's a lot softer and calmer with a little bit of motion, this is a photograph I took quite a few years ago now. This was not intentional. This was me photographing the beginnings of, I think it was the daffodils when they were first growing. And it was a very overcast, dull day. And I had a little bit, my shutter speed wasn't as fast as it should have been. And I was trying to do some macro photography here. And because the light was quite poor, I ended up with some really soft images with slight movement in it. But I actually loved them in the end because it just gave the image a much more softer feel with that slight movement. And it kind of introduced me to trying things like this to create something a little bit different that's not really, really out there. So yeah, ICM can be subtle. It doesn't have to be really crazy and all over the place either. It's personal choice, really. And then we've got long exposure photography, which in some people could argue this doesn't really represent movement, but in many ways it does, because you're capturing movement over a long period of time, or sometimes it's only like a half a second or a second, but you're still capturing that motion over a period of time. And this is obviously a great technique to show the motion in water or clouds. And it's kind of best done where water or clouds are moving past or around a solid subject. So you've seen the really long exposure images, but if you use shorter long exposures, you can get some beautiful motion in your images, which I think we'll see one or two images of that in a minute. But of course, the longer long exposures are great for showing movement in the clouds, or at least the direction the clouds are moving, which can allow a scene where the clouds, you know, might not be that interesting from like a really fast image, but actually when you take them over a long exposure, it can bring them to life. And of course, if you're doing this technique, you'll need a tripod to prevent your static images from blurring. This is an image here to show this by Hayata again. And we've got here a static pier, and you've got the water and the clouds moving through it. So this image here is quite a long exposure. So although you've got the sea really nice and smoothed out here, you can really see that motion in the clouds and see what direction the clouds are moving, which you just couldn't do if you weren't doing a long exposure image, for instance. So it really does allow that motion and that movement through the scene. This is a photograph that I took a few months ago, and this is a much shorter long exposure. I think it's only about 5 seconds this image was taken. So you've not really got any motion in the clouds, just a little bit in certain places. But you can see here there's a little bit of motion in the sea. So for this scene here, I didn't want a really long exposure because I wanted the sky to be still nice and defined. And I wanted to create a nice image with the light in that moment because I knew it'd be very fleeting and would change very quickly. But I also wanted a little bit of motion here just to flatten out some of the crashing waves, which over the 5 seconds, it's allowed me to do that and just create more flattening of the sea, but not enough that it's really soft. So you can see here that what I was trying to create has worked quite well by choosing 5 seconds and putting in an ND filter. But like I say, equally, you could have done this over, 30 seconds, a minute if you wanted to. But for the effect I was trying to create, I just wanted a much shorter long exposure just to flatten out those waves and give the sea and these white areas just a little bit more motion. And this is one here taken over a second, I think it was. And this is just as the wave was coming over and crashing, just taking a photograph here to show the whites of the wave as it was curling over. And just to give the image a little bit more motion here, rather than having the wave as it was, I wanted just a much more sort of artistic, calming feel. And just using that 1 second exposure really allowed me to do that and really show the movement in another way. And here we've got, again, I think this is a 1 second exposure. It's just a small little pebble on the edge of the sea here. And you've got the sea has just come in and it's going back out, or the wave, should I say, just come in and it's going back out again. And you can see as it's going out, I press my shutter and it pulls the sea back out with it and creates this blurring effect. And if you master this over time, which is still something I'm trying to work on, you can create some beautiful images with this technique. And of course, you're photographing something so small, and many people would say it was insignificant, but by having the motion of the sea around it, you can get some really interesting photographs. And this is a photograph here of a really long exposure. This was actually taken on a very calm day, but I wanted to emphasize that calmness here. So I did this, I think this was about a 2.5 minute exposure, if I remember correctly. So it was just creating some motion in the clouds because with being so still and calm, there wasn't much interest. But by doing the 2.5 minutes, I meant minutes, not seconds, minute exposure, I was able to get this motion in the clouds, but also emphasize how still and lacking in movement the sea was that day. So yeah, it just helped to create that feeling. And this is just, again, a sort of 1 to 2 second exposure of the water moving around the rocks at the shore's edge. And this just adds something to it, because if it was taken as a very quick shutter speed, the sea would have been quite messy around it. But actually having this motion and seeing the kind of inlets and the channels that the water was moving, it just creates a much more pleasing and an interesting image, and allows something, again, very basic and small to turn into something quite interesting. And something I don't think anybody's played around with yet is time lapse, or chrono, I think you call it, photography. Both of these are things that I've personally never done, but I've always wanted to do. And I may try and do some of them before the end of, or both of them before the end of this challenge myself. But maybe this is something for you guys to think about. So both of these techniques is when you take a number of images over a period of time and then you pop them together in a multiple exposure image, or you can create a film with them. Now, of course, we kind of say these challenges are photography challenges, but if you think about it, video is actually photography, because it's a number of photographs taken in a very fast shutter speed, or frame rate, should I say, to give us the motion. And time lapse, a lot of cameras nowadays have time lapse built into them. So it's always something worth playing around with. And I'll give you a few examples of the other one in a minute. But I'm just going to play this video here by Michael Shane Bloom, which is a very quick video, but it showcases the beauty of time lapse.
We can't see the video, Kim.
Ah, okay. What I'll maybe do is where are we? Let me put it up. Let me share. It does this, doesn't it, sometimes, YouTube, when you come off, you've got to reshare the other screen. So let me share it from here. Can you guys see it now? Yeah. Cool. Sorry about that. Brilliant. Brilliant. So it's just a very short video there, just to give you an idea. Of course, oh, sorry, YouTube's still playing in the background. There we go. Of course, Michael's a very advanced time lapse. He's done it for a long time, but it just gives you an idea there of what time lapse is for those that maybe aren't aware of it. But you can do it with anything that's moving. And Christopher Gerard, who's one of the other members, he used to, I don't know if he still does, but he used to do really nice time lapse videos of clouds out of his window. And it was actually amazing just to see them moving through the scene. And then when you put nice music to it, it was just a lovely thing to see. So if any of you do have the time and you'd like to learn more about time lapse, or see if you've got the time lapse option in your camera, it might just be something that you might want to play around with as part of this challenge to showcase that movement over a period of time. And you can do it with sunrises, sunsets, clouds, moving trees. You can do it with pretty much anything. But of course, the more something's moving, it's easier to show that movement. And something a lot of people do it with in Scotland is the Northern Lights in the winter, which we of course aren't going to get at this time of year. But it's something that you might want to look into for the winter season potentially. But that other style of photography that I was on about that comes into this is doing things like this, which again, I've not done it myself, so it's just a few images off of the internet. But this is where you've taken, you know, a really fast burst of a number of photographs of a motion, and then you kind of stack them on top of each other. I think some cameras actually do this now in camera, some of the more advanced cameras. But otherwise, you know, there's ways that you can do this in post-processing, but it's just showing that whole movement in one image. and it can be something really fun to play around with if you'd like to. A lot of people do it with like sports and stuff as well, you know, like a skateboarder going up and doing things, as of course as a dancer. But you can do it with like birds coming in to land. You can take a number of images of them coming in, planes coming in to land is another popular one. And this is a really different sort of one here of like birds moving around the sky. So this is a number of images taken at a slightly longer shutter speed, and all can emerge together in this same technique just to create like this interesting image showing all the lines and that the birds are creating as they're moving through the sky. So of course something a little bit more advanced, but it might be something that some of you might want to look into if you haven't, you know, ever thought of this before. It's another exciting way of interpreting this month's challenge. And then we've got multiple exposures, which is a process of taking more than one image and blending them together to get an artistic impression of a scene or subject. So unlike the time lapse or the chronography that we've just looked at, these images aren't like taken as a burst. They're actually like multiple subjects or images taken either over a number of minutes or of different subjects in the scene, or sometimes people even take images from different days and then expose them together. And this sort of photography is really, really good for sort of storytelling and again, getting quite creative. So this is just an image I took last year when I was trying to learn this technique. And it's just 3 images of a cliff face. So I took one in focus, one slightly blurred, zoomed in a little bit, and then another one zoomed in even further. So you've got here 3 images stacked on top of each other of the same cliff at different zoomed in ratios. But it just creates a little bit of motion and movement and gives it a slightly different feel. So of course, not everybody's cup of tea, but again, it's just something you can play around with as part of this challenge. And this image here is 2 photographs taken and just put together as well as a multiple exposure. So you've got 2 static images here actually, one of the beach huts, and then you can just make out a horizon line there. And that's a photograph of the actual sea and the sky that I've then imposed on top of each other, just to give the image a little bit of like a motion to it in some ways, but also blur the sea and the sky together with the beach huts. It just gives the photo, like I say, a slightly different feel. And to me, it almost feels like the beach huts are in the sky.
Kim, how do you do that blending that you're talking about?
So my camera actually does it in camera, but otherwise you can do it in Photoshop. So cool. Yeah, have a look, because you might actually have it. A lot of cameras have it in camera now. It's just under multiple exposure modes. And this will only work if you're doing it on the same day in the same shoot, like one after the other. But you can take like a number of images, one after the other, moving around and snapping them, and your camera will automatically do it for you. But if you've not got that, then yeah, you've got to kind of do it through editing software.
Right.
Yeah.
My camera doesn't do it. I know that now. Yeah. I'll leave Photoshop for a while.
Maybe Daryl can help you with that at the weekend. This is another photograph here. Again, all of these I've done in camera because my camera allows me to do it. But this was of an autumn woodland scene last year. And this is actually an ICM shot mixed together with a sharper exposure image. And that's something that a lot of ICM artists are starting to do now, is they'll do ICM images and some frozen images and stack them on top of each other to have a clear image and of a scene, but with the motion around it, which can be exciting for those of you, again, who want to explore this type of photography. And this is a number, I think it's 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 images of rope at a harbour that I've just photographed one after the other, moving the camera slightly to just stack them together. But you can of course do this with other subjects to create more of a movement feel. Then light painting is something people might want to look into. I actually hadn't thought about this until Anne posted an image on the group of light painting. But this is where you use lights, usually torches, to paint pictures, words or shapes in a photograph. And you really need it to be dark to do this. So for pretty much all of us at this time of year, apart from those in Australia, We probably won't be able to do this unless we do it indoors with the curtains shut and the lights off. But again, it's something to think about maybe for the winter if people are interested in continuing this movement, because as we've seen, each challenge sort of runs into each other. So it might be something you might want to explore later in the year. But yeah, you basically put your camera on a tripod, paint around things, and take a long exposure image. And this was the image by Anne that inspired me to put this in the presentation. So she's just gone in front of her camera here with a torch and just moved it around. And like I say, you can paint anything you want, really. Your name, shapes. You can even use it to like light up different things and create different things as well to create that motion. And these are just some popular things that probably for those of you who are in camera clubs, you've probably done stuff like this in the winter. But this is one of these, I believe, these big like LED light stick things that you move around and you get this beautiful rainbow effect. And thinking about the movement actually from earlier on of moving your body, this can be a fun way to do that in the winter and get a bit of exercise while you're doing your photography. And this is quite a well-known thing a lot of people do in the winter as well, is they basically put steel wool in something and they spin it around to create these sort of images as well. So again, showcasing movement with that long exposure. And the last thing is digital artistry, and this is inspired by Peter's photograph here, where he's used some of the I think he said it was movement tool or something in Photoshop to create this motion here, which actually I think is quite exciting, because this is of the famous Boforo Rock, as many of you will have seen the images that he posted. But it's nice actually to have this motion here and create something a little bit different and have the photographer standing on top. So although again, this isn't everybody's cup of tea, and we're of course delving into more of the digital art side of things, these are all things that, you know, you're free to explore if you'd like to, and just see, you know, do these things work for you or do they not? It's all kind of working out what your sort of voice is with your own work. So it's just something to consider. So I hope you can all see now that the photographic opportunities for movement really are endless. Remember, there's no right or wrong ways to interpret every challenge that we do. So whatever thing you want to explore, whether it's something we've done this evening or something completely different, you know, feel free to do it and share it with everybody. So, you know, the obvious things are, of course, wildlife, sports, people, water, clouds, wind blowing, vehicles. Or you can get really creative and create your own movement in your images and just see what you come up with. And then can you add more movement when you're out with your camera? So thinking about those well-being aspects at the start, you know, maybe walking a bit more or moving with your camera, and just see if you can really enhance the positive benefits that come your way, to really feel into that well-being aspect of being out with your camera, as well as the actual process of creating your images. And yeah, just feel into the environment around you. How is the world around you moving? I often find some of the most captivating images have been created with the motion. The photographers really studied the movement of the water, the movement of the clouds, the movement of the wildlife or the car passing, and they've then allowed themselves to create images using that movement, and it just makes the image feel so much more emotive because we can relate to it and we can really feel into it. So yeah, just think when you're out doing this challenge, do you want to freeze something that's moving, or do you want to kind of recreate the image? So create it in a way that's allowing you to showcase what you want to showcase through including some of that movement, using potentially some of the things that I've shared with you this evening. So yeah, it's now time for our kind of discussion time. So yeah, it'd be good to kind of hear what people have thought of this, if anything comes to mind, and or anything else anybody wants to discuss before we sign off.
No, thanks, Kim. That was very well put together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks,
Yeah.
Claire.
I found it really useful as well, sort of things that I hadn't thought about before. because I'm fairly new to this side of things. And yeah, that was really useful, Kim. Thank you. Just for different ideas and what you can do. Some things, as you say, not my cup of tea, but yeah, there's other things I'd really like to give a wee try. So thank you. Yeah, it's good.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That was great. One of the things, the really long exposures, do you have to use an ND filter for that? You said about 2.5 minutes and things like that.
Yeah, you do. Unless you're photographing like before sunrise or after sunset, when there's not much light, you can get away with not using them. But yeah, if you're photographing any other time of the day, you would need to use them. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that is a cheap way for people that don't want to buy ND filters. Just make sure you go out when it's sort of like dawn and dusk, so that you've got that lovely blue light and you can get these much longer exposures without having to buy anything.
Don't do what I done one day. I was doing long exposures down at St Baldred's Cradle in East Lothian, and I was mucking about different exposures, and guess what I'd done? I put my ND filter in my back pocket and sat down on the rocks.
Oh no. Oh dear.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. It never cut me. That's the main thing.
Exactly.
No, I think what I liked about the challenge of movement, because at first I was like thinking movement, virtually, a lot of things move, and I was just trying to think, what can I do that's not so obvious? And I thought that was maybe bringing out my creativity and movement to try and just think about something less obvious, because as you say, there's movements all around us in all shapes and forms, so.
Yeah. It is about thinking that, isn't it? It's like, do we photograph the obvious or do we try something else? But that's quite nice when you've got like the kind of whole month to do it, and then obviously continue it as well into other challenges. It gives you that opportunity. So yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic as well. People are posting up, these great images that they've taken, and it really inspires you. Going, oh, I hadn't thought about doing that, but that looks really good. Give it a try. So I think it's great that people have, obviously everybody's got so many different ideas of how to interpret this, and it can be really inspiring for everybody else. It's really good.
But that's why it's nice when you're doing this as part of a group as well, because that inspiration is so important, and not all of us have the opportunity to physically have people in our lives that we can go out with and do photography with and be inspired by. And even if we do, it's usually the same people all the time. But it's quite nice when you've got a group from, in some cases, different countries as well, that have got, coming up with different things, different life stories as well, and different opportunities, and what's accessible to them. And it's nice to see that as well, and see, a mix of things, because definitely the inspiration parts. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. Great.
When you were talking about sort of movement, that actually brought to mind as a photograph that Joe McNally took at the Tokyo Olympics. I don't know if it'll come up if I can share my screen briefly.
Okay.
Can I do that? See if I
can. Able to now, Peter.
Okay, thank you. See if it's going to be. Yeah, as I say, it's just one person more or less in focus, and the rest of the runners around him are blurred. But
wow,
I thought it was an amazing photograph at the time.
It is, isn't it?
I remember that one.
Yeah. I'll stop sharing now if that's okay.
That's good. Really nice.
Thank you, Peter. It shows what you can do in one image as well. Like, some people will probably think that was a number of images superimposed, but it's like, it just shows you what you can do with one image if you've got the right subject and the right technique. Amazing.
Unfortunately, I can't get people to sort of stand still long enough to focus on them, and the rest of them running around.
Yeah, it can be challenging sometimes finding, especially these sports images, isn't it? It's like, if you don't have access to these venues, it can be quite difficult to get stuff like that.
I did think of going out last weekend for the Kilt Walk, which was going past here, but I was out on my bike, and then when I got back, they were sort of passing already anyway. And I had to go and have a shower.
Oh, I've always thought of doing that walk myself, but I always forget about it, and I'm like, oh, there we go, another year it's passed.
You need to photograph from on your bike.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
There you go, got double movement there. You could have been photographing as you're going towards them as well as I'm moving. That could have been quite interesting.
You've actually just reminded me, once I was on my bike and I'm done hands-free, I took a photograph of my shadow and I was moving.
Yeah.
Multiple exposure of your teeth lying on the ground behind.
It was a quiet road, Peter, thank goodness.
All right.
What piece of camera equipment did that cost you?
It was just a cheap phone.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot you can do, isn't there? But it's kind of try to keep things safe. Another thing I didn't speak about was being a passenger of a car. You can actually do some amazing things when you're in the passenger seat of a car, like ICM and other things of moving past things. And yeah, that's always something else to consider if you're not driving, of course. Yeah.
The last couple of days, my wife Isabel's had she's got a plant, a wandering iris it's called, and it goes from a bud to a full blooming flower and then just shrivels up within 24 hours. So I set up a camera taking a photograph every 15 minutes. So I think I've got 108 photographs that I put into a time lapse. But I don't think it would sort of display on your website or anything.
Oh, it'd be cool to see that. I love things looking at flowers and stuff, you know, when they're coming up. Like these really long ones, you know, over like weeks and sometimes months are just insane what they do for like planet Earth and stuff. It's just unbelievable. Yeah.
But as I say, this was just within 24 hours it had started being in full bloom and then shriveled up.
I wonder what that purpose is, because it's not got much time to do what it needs to do, does it? It's pretty strange, isn't it? Brilliant.
Just picking up on what you said about the car journeys. There's a photographer called Julianne Cost who does a lot of work. Well, she works for Adobe and she does a lot of the stuff at the big conferences. And she was traveling some distances and she had a driver. She was sat in the front seat and she was just taking photographs through the passenger window over a long period of time. So if you go on our website, it's quite interesting to see the pictures that she did and how she turned that into a book. It was quite nice.
Wow. Gosh. It's amazing how you can pass the time as well when you're doing things like that. That's incredible. Yeah. There must be quite interesting images there. What did you say her name was again, Julie?
Julie Ann. It's one word, Julie, A-N-N-E. And it's Cost, K-O-S-T.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to have a proper look at that. Yeah. I found her, so I'll have a good look at her website afterwards. Brilliant. Wonderful.
Wendy McCallum, she submitted a photograph, an ICM one taken when driving the car. It's just appeared on Facebook. Which is really, I think it's taken near Inverurie, she said.
Okay.
She's a passenger in the car. It looks really, really nice, yeah.
Not seen that one. Or maybe I have, but I've done a few. Oh yes, no, I have seen that one. Yes, because she's Sky, hasn't she?
Nice photograph, yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing actually. She does some really interesting stuff with edits and things to create something exciting. So yeah, it does show you what you can do, definitely. Yeah, brilliant. Great. Well, thank you all for coming this evening. I put it in the email, but just in case anybody misses it, I've changed the time of next week's check-in for those who want to attend. I've got friends come over from Canada next week for 2 weeks, and there's something on the same time we're meant to have the catch-up. So I've moved it from 7 p.m. to 2 p.m. On the 22nd. So I know it might not be suitable for some people, but hopefully the week after, when I arrange that one, which I've not arranged yet, but it should be on the 27th. I'll make sure that one's 7 p.m. for those who prefer an evening session. And of course, just to remind you all that Daryl's doing his little sharing session on Sunday. So for anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more about photo editing, he's going to do just sort of like a general editing thing and then answer any questions people might have afterwards. Because I know there's a number of people on the group that would like to learn a little bit more about editing but aren't really sure. So yeah, he's kindly offered to give up an hour or so of his time to do that on Sunday. But again, if you can't make it, it will be recorded. That one will be. So yeah, you can watch it back as well. So yeah, does anybody else got anything? Uh-huh.
Hey, will
Hi.
I be with the next Zoom? Is that going to be my time schedule, my time zone, or just overseas? Dude,
So the one on Sunday is at 10 a.m. UK time, which is Daryl's one. So that one you probably won't be able to come to because that'll be 5 o'clock in the morning for you.
making sure you weren't dead.
But the
Okay.
the community catch up that's moved from 7 p.m. to 2 p.m. UK time, that'll be 1, 2. God, my maths isn't great.
9 in the morning.
9, there we go. When you go back from like 12, I'm just like get confused. So that'll be 9 in the morning for you. So hopefully you might make that one. That's on the 22nd.
Would you be able to, be able to send that to me in a message so I won't forget?
Yeah, no worries. It's also in a little email that I put out this morning if you've got it. But if not, I can send it to you in a message. That's no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to share or say before we say goodbye this evening or morning or afternoon in Wonderland's case? No? Brilliant.
Excellent.
Well, thank you again.
Very good.
I look forward to... Sorry, Ian, were you about to say something?
Well, I was just saying it was very good, Kim. That was really...
Thing with Zoom, you're like trying to look at everybody and you can't work out if people are about to speak or what. Brilliant. Well, thank you guys so much, and I'll hopefully see some of you at the next check-in or possibly on Sunday at Daryl's thing. So yeah, and I look forward to seeing all your images that you come up with for the rest of the challenge. So yeah, take care everybody, and I'll see you again soon.
Okay.
Thank you.